What you're seeing is a static image of me holding 3 pages, which is to a 6-page rough draft of my next video, which is taking longer than I was expecting, which is going to be a video where I respond to Rick Beato and Andy Edwards. And the reason I respond to those two is simply because their videos help me to fill in the blanks on a lot of videos that I do, since I talk about music and media, and there are things with their videos that make me understand things that it gives me a better understanding. Now that that's out of the way, on to the actual video itself. So, hello and welcome, Neko here, and it's going to be a response to Andy Edwards, Andy's Sunday School, What Do We Teach? Now, he talked about a lot of things in his video. One of the things he does talk about that I'm not going to get into is the subject of aesthetics, simply because I don't believe I fully comprehend what he's talking about. However, another thing he does talk about is about rethinking education, and this is something that I do agree with. Matter of fact, he's not the first person that I've heard talk about this. I've also heard this from Sir Ken Robinson, who has this presentation such as "Do Schools Kill Creativity?" And yeah, I know people will crack jokes about TED, but that's TED proper, not TEDx. But yeah, and I've had this screen capped in particular. So I have a big interest in education, and I think we all do. And I do agree with this. This is why Ken does his presentation. This is why I take the time to do my videos, as well as, of course, why Andy Edwards does his videos. We all have an interest in education, but of course, things aren't actually going right. So, getting into it, things that Andy talked about, and I do have a page and a half worth of notes that I've written down, so I don't forget anything. Anyways, he talks about music education and how too much of education is vocational. I do agree with this. Matter of fact, the last year of my high school, they start this program where you basically do a sort of community service thing, so it gets you into the whole working mindset and stuff like that. So yeah, there is a big emphasis on vocation and not so much anything else. He also says how we need to be teaching in relation to creativity. I do agree with this. It isn't just like what we can do for money, but also what we can do for ourselves and stuff like that. Matter of fact, 3 minutes and 8 seconds into his video, Andy says there needs to be an integration between the subjects. I agree. Sometimes something we learn from one subject can apply to another subject, which is why integration is important. That's not happening when it comes to creativity. I do agree with that. Certain things can probably help a creative person more, such as geometry, for example. I know geometry actually helps me a lot, obviously. Let's see. Another thing, education is supposed to be for passing on knowledge. Teach someone something they don't know. And yeah, this is something that we should have with education. Unfortunately, that's not the priority, especially since we don't know the future. Now, this next part, at first, I would have been not confrontational, but I would have been disagreeing on. But I have seen this video from Aiden Paladin, talks about how, not just how people view education and those with higher education, those who go for the colleges and stuff, but also how we as a community view those in positions of higher education. Ken Robinson talks a little bit about that as well. Actually, I would like to see Sir Ken Robinson, Aiden Paladin, and Andy Edwards actually get together and talk about this. I believe that would be an interesting subject to get into. But yeah, thanks to Aiden Paladin, I got to understand this next part that Andy Edwards gets into, which is that we have changed the way we examine. Um, let's see. We should be teaching others what they don't know and test them. And I do agree with this. We should be seeing if people can understand what they're being taught and see if they can apply that information. Unfortunately, a lot of that isn't what's prioritized. What's often prioritized is how well you can memorize the information, which is also why you'd end up, not only that, but also a lot of teachers tend to put their ideologies into the lesson rather than letting someone come to their own conclusions or have their own understanding, which is why a lot of times you'll see a lot of college graduates who will repeat the same rhetoric but don't fully understand what that rhetoric actually is. So there are flaws there. Another thing is that we are approaching a cultural epoch and we do need to change. And this is something that I actually do agree with. Especially since a big part of this shifting epoch, the shifting culture, is the technological bloom we see. And it's something that I've noticed as well. I mean, obviously that's why I embrace the whole thing with like VTubers and virtual modeling and stuff like that. You know, why I'm part of why I'm doing this. Well, doing a presentation in this manner. But yes, but one thing I do notice is that when it comes to technology, we are seeing like three different ways that it's advancing rather than just advancing in one way like what normally happens, which is that there's advancements for humanities, advancement for industry, and advancement for conflict. And unfortunately, there are people who would favor one of these advancements while believing the other two advancements have no value, which in turn ends up having a disagreement on what we should be using our technology for and what we should be using our resources for. And unfortunately, I honestly do believe, and yeah, this is more of a belief. I don't have any firm proof of this, but it seems to me that a large part of why we seem to be culturally stuck is because we as a society can't really agree on where to go from here. Another thing Andy Edwards goes into is that education lacks inclusion for creative people. And worse, there's a problem of people being put into identity groups. And honestly, this is something that I've experienced in high school. 2002 graduate here, because I do have what's called attention deficit disorder, although these days people call it attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, even though the hyperactive part of it does not apply to me. Now, my biggest problem is difficulty in recalling information, which, as you can imagine, did make things unnecessarily difficult when it comes to school, with the whole thing of prioritizing memory above application and understanding. So there's that. But yeah, you get put into this identity group, and it's like, you're not this person who can do this thing, you're so and so with this condition, or so and so with this skin color, so and so of this religion, you know? You get put into this box, and unfortunately, you end up having limits placed upon you based upon that box, based upon that identity. This is something that I myself had lived through because of the whole thing with ADD, ADHD. And, you know, a lot of other people tend to go through that as well. So there are a lot of unfortunate limitations and flaws when it comes to the education system. Now, back onto the subject of creativity. As Andy says, some people are blinded by creativity, which is an interesting thing to put it, but I do agree with it because, like, I myself back in 2018 figured I can't be a content creator, so for a time I felt like I should give up. And I forgot if it was like 2020 or 2021, in one of those years I finally released a new video. I finally come back to YouTube after over a year of inactivity and stuff like that. Because by not being creative, like, it felt empty. It felt like I was doing nothing with myself. I basically felt worthless. So when you're a creative type, you do need an outlet for that creativity. But then there's another thing that Andy Edwards talks about, which is how creative people can be a problem or a solution. In a sense, this makes sense. Sometimes a creative person can make an observation, like say there's someone who does creative writing, they make an observation, they put that observation to writing, and then it gets people to see a solution to something that is a problem that the creative person notices. And also the whole thing of creative people can be a problem in that if they don't have a healthy outlet for their creativity, then you get people who will cause trouble just because they're bored. How many times are there fabrication of information and reality, fabrication of facts just because someone's bored, or because they don't put their creativity to good use. And I mean good in the sense of morals. Even though some can argue that moral is a social construct, but this is not the time to have that argument. Now, another thing Andy Edwards goes into is about how teaching the technical no longer matters, which I also agree with, not just because we have YouTube and online lessons and private lessons. There's also the fact that libraries exist. You go to a library, read a book on whatever subject you want to learn. You could buy books. I know myself, after high school, after I got a job, one of the things I did was buy a book on art in order to continue my artistic endeavors. So there is that. Now, one more thing to get into before I end this video is something that I believe is very important, which I noticed when I was in high school, which is the idea of nobody fails, because in order to make a school look good, you have to make sure that people aren't failing. Some people call this nobody gets left behind, but I do believe people end up being left behind because they don't graduate high school with the necessary skills. Like going by what Andy Edwards was saying, about it, the schools, they focus on the status, and schools, they work towards the clout, which in turn means lowering the difficulty of subject lessons, which can also include some things that can be referred to as cheats, such as Cliff Notes. These things that make things easier for everyone, but at the same time, you're not able to really push yourself to the best that you can be. Granted, this isn't everyone. Sometimes you're lucky and you do get a teacher that actually cares, but then there's some people just there to phone it in. Okay, I'm going to be brutally honest. I've had a few teachers that I do believe should not have been in the teaching profession. I am not going to name names because that would be rude. But, yeah, just as how you have people who will teach, you also have people who won't teach, and then there's certain rules within the system that actually hinders the teachers from actually teaching. So sometimes it isn't even the teachers, but rather the administration that tells the teachers that they can't teach this, they can't teach that. They just have to prioritize the test results, prioritize memory. Yeah. Which is probably why we end up in the social problems that we have today. So that's it when it comes to my thoughts. Thank you to Andy Edwards for giving his thoughts, because it definitely give me some means to talk, as well as made me realize other things. And with that said, I am Neko, and I thank you for watching.